So continuing with our conversation about transactions, now I want to give you an example just to confirm what I have just explained to you. So we said before that whenever I want to initiate a transaction or make a transaction, this is super basic. I need to show the system that I have funds in order to do so. So the sum of my inputs needs to be greater than the outputs. And let's say that I have 5 Bitcoin available to spend and I want to send my mom, as we said before, 0.5 Bitcoin, okay? The difference between the inputs and the outputs is the fee of the transaction. We mentioned before that whenever I want to make a transaction, I need to pay a fee. And that fee is one of the rewards and one of the economical incentives that the miners have in order to behave honestly in the system. Okay, so the fees of all the transactions that are in a block and the block reward that we said before, that is 6.25 Bitcoin currently. Okay, so the difference is the fee. Now you may be thinking 4.5 Bitcoin as a fee is way too high. It is. So here is when the wallet that we have starts working, because our wallet is going to calculate an enough value as a fee for the miners, and the rest is going to be what is called the change. So we said before that in a transaction we can have one or more outputs. Okay, so whenever the fee is way too high, our wallet is going to calculate a certain amount of BTC for the miners as a fee, and the rest is going to be described as a second output here, and that output is going to be a transaction for us again. It's going to be sent for us again without us realizing that the wallet is doing this. Okay, so we said before, in a transaction all inputs needs to be spent. Okay, and in one transaction we can have more than one output. So whenever the fee is way too high, the difference is way too high, the wallet is going to calculate a fee for the miners, and the rest is going to be a second output that the wallet is calculating, and this is called the change, and it's going to be sent to us again without us realizing this. Okay, this is the information that I wanted you to know about transactions before we go again to the Bitcoin white paper. Now let's read what Satoshi wrote for us. We define an electronic coin as a chain of digital signatures. This is very interesting because we said before that transactions are a chain of, so this is interesting because, as we said before, a blockchain is a chain of ownership of who has the right to spend those Bitcoin next. Okay, and here Satoshi is defining it as we define an electronic coin as a chain of digital signatures, because we also know that a blockchain is the blockchain of information and transactions, and those transactions can only be made by the person who has the private keys in order to sign the message and create a digital signature, if that makes sense. Okay, each owner transfers the coin to the next by digitally signing a hash of the previous transaction and the public key of the next owner and adding this to the end of the coin. A payee can verify the signature to verify the chain of ownership. Basically here what Satoshi is saying, that whenever I create a transaction, I am signing the hash of the previous transaction, and at the same time I am signing the public key of the owner, of the next owner who is going to receive the funds. And here in this graph you can see exactly what I have just mentioned. We have the owner 1, yes, okay, so here says owners 1 private key. With my private key, with his private key, he's going to sign the message, the transaction, he's going to create a digital signature, And by doing so, he is signing the hash of the previous transaction and the public key of the second owner. That's it. Finally, to close the topic of transactions, here I want to highlight the following. Transactions must be publicly announced, and we need a system for participants to agree on a single history of the order in which they were received. The payee needs to prove that at the time of each transaction, the majority of the nodes agree it was the first received. Basically here what Satoshi is saying is something that I mentioned before about the consensus mechanism. So all the nodes need to agree on what has already happened before in the system, about the history of the system, and they need to follow certain rules as well. Okay, that is part of the consensus mechanism and the rules that all the participants in the network need to follow in order for the system to work in the way it works. All right? Now, up next, timestamp server. This is basically information that it is added in the header of a block whenever we are mining the next block. Okay, so each header of each block has different type of information, and that one of those information is the exact time in which that specific block has been mined. That's it, pretty much. All right, let's take a mini break for a second and talk about this. This might be a lot of information for you, especially if you're just getting started. But trust me, this is the best thing that you can do. Especially that's why I encourage you at the very beginning to take notes, because all the concepts that we are mentioning right now, you can go ahead and keep on studying them so that in a month or in a little bit of time, you come back to this video, to the white paper, and everything will make more sense. Let me tell you a little bit about how it was for me. When I first started to learn about Bitcoin, I tried to learn this paper, but I understood nothing. This was like Chinese for me. What I did was go ahead and study many different concepts individually so that everything would make more sense whenever I came back, which I did. I came back, I read this again, and everything made sense, okay? So I want you to let you know that this is normal if you don't understand anything yet. You have to continue pushing yourself, studying the topics, the concepts, and then whenever you come back, you will understand this at the highest level possible. It's a one-way journey in terms of knowledge, in terms of comprehension of what Bitcoin is and why the system is decentralized, and what it means for humanity that we have an electronic, digital, decentralized system for us to transfer monetary value, okay? And also among many, many things that Bitcoin provides to humanity, all right? So whenever you understand that, the first time I started to learn about Bitcoin, I couldn't sleep for like minimum 2 weeks because it blew my mind. It blew my mind, and it's a one-way journey in terms of knowledge. And eventually, you will answer yourself the question that everyone asks: why should I invest in Bitcoin? It's because of your understanding and comprehension of how the system works, why it is unique, and why humanity needs it. Okay? That is something that I wanted to highlight before we continue. Now we need to continue with point number 4 that Satoshi is highlighting in the Bitcoin white paper. And now we're going to talk about proof of work. A decentralized algorithm such as proof of work is one of the 4 elements that I mentioned before that are key to achieve decentralization in the system. Okay, so now we're going to read this. And the first time I'm going to read it, you will not understand it until I explain to you many different things, and then we'll be coming back here and analyze it again. All right, number 4, point number 4, proof of work. To implement a distributed timestamp server on a peer-to-peer basis, we will need to use a proof of work system similar to Adam's backhash cache. Adam Back is one of those people that I told you Satoshi mentioned, and from whom Satoshi took the contribution that he had made in the past. I had the honor to meet him and interview him. You can go ahead and check out my YouTube channel, Tech with Carolina, where you can find more information about why he did what he did and why he was mentioned by Satoshi in the Bitcoin white paper. Also, if you are planning to join the blockchain space and be more involved in the community, I suggest that you follow Adam on Twitter, and you are very active on Twitter. You will be more aware of many different things that are going on the market, not only from a technical point of view, but also from a macro point of view, so to speak. Okay, so Adam's Back Hashcash rather than newspaper or Usenet post. The proof of work involves scanning for a value that when hashed, such as with SHA-256, the hash begins with a number of 0 bits. I'm going to explain to you everything here. The average work required is exponential in the number of 0 bits required and can be verified by executing a single cache. For our timestamp network, we implement the proof of work by incrementing a nonce. Okay, here I want you to write down SHA-256 hash, proof of work, and nonce. This is a very important concept that I want you to write down so that you understand the process of mining and proof of work a little bit better, that we're going to explain in a second. Okay, a nonce in the block until a value is found that gives the block's hash the required 0 bits. Once the CPU effort has been expended to make it satisfy the proof of work, the block cannot be changed without redoing the work. Okay, what does this mean? I'm going to explain to you. So we know that in Bitcoin it's all about keeping the transactions flowing in the system, and whenever I initiate a transaction, that information is propagated in the system, and all the nodes know that there is a transaction from Catalina that needs to be confirmed. From that point until a transaction is confirmed and is in a block and the block is mined and that information is propagated in the system and validated, many things happen in the middle. And one of the things that happen is the proof of work and the mining process, okay? So who are the miners and what do they have to do? So whenever I initiate a transaction, that transaction is going to be in something that is called the mempool, the Bitcoin memory pool, until a miner comes, pick the transaction and put it in a candidate block. So all the miners are in a competition between each other to see who is able to mine the next block the fastest. And that competition is based on the hashing power of their computers. The more hashing power you have, the best chances you have to mine the next block, okay? So whenever all the miners are trying to mine the next block the fastest, they are going to create a candidate block, okay? And what they are going to do is they're going to put the first transaction, that is a very special transaction that I mentioned before, which is the Coinbase transactions. The Coinbase transaction. And this is like a paycheck that the miners are going to receive if they are able to mine the next block and confirm the transactions and extend the block of chain. We know that they are economically incentivized so that they can behave honestly in the system. And whenever a miner finds the next block and is able to extend the block of chain, he is going to receive the 2 rewards that are here, and this is like a payment for themselves. Okay, so a miner is trying to extend the block of chain, as we said, and he is creating a candidate block. So my transaction, as I said before, was in the mempool, in the Bitcoin memory pool. So the miners are going to pick the transactions, they are going to put it in the block, in a candidate block, and they're going to try to find the piece of information or the puzzle or the mathematical problem that they need to solve in order to mine the next block, the fastest, so to speak. And this piece of information, this puzzle, this mathematical problem is called the nonce. And that's why we highlighted before. This concept is super important, and the nonce is included in the header of the block. Something that we mentioned before is that the process of mining requires making a double hash of the header of the block. And the hash of the header of the block includes the hash of the previous block. And that's why they are cryptographically connected, okay? So to summarize what we have just explained, we know that all the miners are computers, and they are in a computational contest. They are in a competition between each other to see who is able to mine the next block the fastest, and that competition is based on their computing power of their computers, okay? We know that they have all created a candidate block where they have put all the transactions that they picked from the mempool, including my transaction. And there is one special transaction in the block, which is called the coin-based transaction, which is like a payment to themselves in the case that they win the competition, okay? Very well. So we know that what they need to find out is the nonce, all right? And the process of mining requires making a double hash of the header of the block. Let's say that this block is called B, okay? And here I have just wrote for you. The hash function of B needs to start with a number of zeros. We know that the hash function of the header of the block, okay, needs to start with a number of zero. The hash of the header of the block needs to start with a number of zeros. And we also know that in order to create a hash, we need a hash function and an algorithm. And the algorithm that we use the most in Bitcoin is the SHA-256 algorithm, which Satoshi has also just mentioned to us when we just read the paragraph. Remember, we're going to read it again. But okay, so the hash function of B, there is a property that all hash functions have, which is that they are only one way. They are like one-way hash functions, okay? So if we know that the hash of the header of the block needs to start with a number of zeros, there is no way for us to go back and see which piece of information is generating these 4 zeros. And this piece of information is what the miners need to find out. It's a puzzle that they need to solve, okay? And that is the nonce. That is the nonce as well. The more zeros we have here at the beginning, the more difficult it is in the system to mine. These zeros that are at the beginning of the hash of the block, okay, represents the difficulty in the system to mine. And as these nonce, finding these nonce is based on probabilities, the more miners we have, for example, joining the network to mine, the easier it's going to become, right? And the more, if we have the vice versa situation, if a lot of miners stop mining and they leave the system, it's going to be way too difficult for the miners to find the next block and to mine the next block and find the nonce. That means that the difficulty in Bitcoin is adjusted every 2016 blocks, which means in terms of times, every 2 weeks on average, okay? Anyhow, so we know that the hash function of the header of the block needs to start with a number of zeros, and whenever a miner is able to find it and to see that the nonce matches a certain number of zeros, that miner is going to win the competition, is going to mine the block, is going to confirm all the transactions, and he's going to win the rewards, okay, that are in the coin-based transaction here. And those rewards are the fees of all the transactions that are here, and the block reward, which is the new Bitcoin that have been created because they have just mined the last block of the block of chain, which currently is 6.25 Bitcoin, okay? Now we can read again what Satoshi wrote and see how much we can understand after the explanation that I have just given to you. To implement a distributed timestamp server on a peer-to-peer basis, we will need to use a proof of work system. Okay, so we need proof of work in order to give security and immutability to the system. Okay, the proof of work involves scanning for a value that, when hashed, such as with the SHA-256, the hash begins with a number of zeros. So as we said before, we said that the hash of the header of the block needs to start with a number of zeros, and in order to do that, we need a hash function and an algorithm, such as the 256 algorithm that Satoshi is mentioning here. Okay, the average work required is exponential in the number of zeros bits required, and it can be verified by executing a single cache. For our timestamp network, we implement the proof of work by incrementing nonce in the block until a value is found that gives the block's hash the required number of zeros. That is exactly what we explained before, and that is what you need to understand, okay? Once the CPU effort has been expended to make it satisfy the proof of work, the block cannot be changed without redoing the work. What does this mean? That once a block has been mined and that information and the transactions have been confirmed, and once a miner mines the next block and extends the block of chain, that information cannot be modified. And that has to do with the security and the immutability of the system. Once a transaction has been put it in a block that has been mined and extended in the block of chain, that information cannot be modified ever again, okay? Now, we're going to continue analyzing point number 5 because we don't have that much time. You can continue reading and you can continue reading again. I suggest that you download the white paper and read it yourself, and that if you're not understanding that much right now, you save it on your computer, you keep on studying, and then you come back and it will all make sense for you. I promise. Okay, so point number 5. Here Satoshi is describing the network. We know that Bitcoin is a distributed network based on computers, which are nodes, and those nodes are constantly communicating between each other about the true and valid reality of the system. And they are following rules, okay? And they are also following what has already happened in the system before, so that they know that a transaction cannot be made twice, okay? Very well. So the steps to run the network are as follows. Here, Satoshi is explaining to us how the network works and the chronological process, so to speak, of the network. So number 1, he says, new transactions are broadcasted to all nodes. So as we said before, for example, when me, Carolina, I initiate a transaction, 0.5 Bitcoin that I want to send to my mom, that information is propagated in the system. All the nodes know that there is one transaction that needs to be confirmed. 2, each node collects new transactions into a block. Okay, Satoshi here is calling the miners node, because miners are a type of node, but he is not calling them nodes, miners, excuse me. He's just calling them nodes. So the nodes are going to collect the new transactions into a block. As we said before, the miners are in a competition and they are creating a candidate block in order to extend the block of chain and mine it, okay? And they are going to go to the mempool, the Bitcoin memory pool, where all the transactions that have not been confirmed yet are like hanging in there, so to speak, and they are going to collect the transactions and put them in a block, as Satoshi is describing here. Number 3, each node works on finding a difficult proof of work for its block. So each miner is going to try to find and the proof of work necessary that he needs to use to find and mine the block next, Okay, this is basically what we explained before about mining and proof of work. Number 4, when a node finds a proof of work, it broadcasts the block to all nodes. So when a miner is able to extend the block of chain, that information is also propagated in the system. Number 5, nodes accept the block only if all transactions are in a valid and not already spent. Okay, so whenever a miner mines the next block, all the other nodes that are full nodes or many other type of nodes, they can verify that all the transactions and everything is okay in that block, meaning that there is not even a single transaction that has been made in the past before, okay, to prevent actually the double spending problem that we described before. And number 6, nodes express their acceptance of the block by working on creating the next block in the chain, using the hash of the accepted block as a previous block hash. So what this means is that they are going to accept that information if that is valid, and immediately they are going to start trying to find the next block, okay? And the average time for mining a block in Bitcoin is 10 minutes. 10 minutes is the average time. It can be way less or it can be longer depending on how congested the system is in that precise moment. Okay, what I'm going to explain to you now is important because this happens often in Bitcoin. These are the famous forks. This is not a soft fork or a hard fork. This is just forks. And if you're a miner or if you know someone who mines Bitcoin or any other altcoin, they know what I'm going to explain to you right now. So nodes always consider the longest chain to be the correct one and will keep working on extending it. As we said before, when I explained this to you, I didn't have like the time or context to explain to you what this really means. So whenever you hear people telling you the longest chain wins, means that the chain is going to win with the most amount of hashing power and not with the most amount of blocks. It's all about hashing power here, okay? So let me describe the following situation. If two nodes broadcast different versions of the next block simultaneously, some nodes may receive one or the other first. Let me explain. For example, let's say that I am in Argentina, okay? And I find the next block right now. And I broadcast that information to the network. And at the same time, almost at the same time, another miner in Germany does the same, finds the next block and broadcasts that information to the network. What this means is that we have two possible chains to be recognized as the longest chain, okay? Simultaneously, this can happen simultaneously. So all the nodes that are maybe closer to me in Argentina are going to receive this information a little bit faster than the ones in Germany, and the Germans are going to receive this information a little bit faster, and they are going to recognize that extension of the block of chain as the valid. Okay, so we have two possible extensions of the block of chain here. Okay, and what happens is the following. In that case, they work on the first one they received, but save the other branch in case it becomes longer. The tie will be broken when the next proof of work is found and one branch becomes longer. The nodes that were working on the other branch will then switch to the longer one. So let's say that the chain in Argentina finds the next block faster, okay? That information is going to be propagated in the system, and the nodes in Germany are going to realize that the chain that they were identifying as the true version of the system was not actually the valid one, okay? So they are going to actually redo everything, and they are going to recognize the chain that was in Argentina as the valid one, as me or the nodes in Argentina were able to mine the next block the fastest. Okay? This happens often in Bitcoin. And this is what they are called forks. Forks in Bitcoin are something that we see very, very often in the system. All right, now we can continue to point number 6, incentives. And here Satoshi is talking about the economical incentives that the miners have in order to do their work honestly. Okay? And yeah, so let's read it together, because everything that he wrote here are topics that we have already mentioned before. Look, by convention, the first transaction in a block is a very special transaction that starts with a new coin owned by the creator of the block. So as we said before, the first transaction in a block is special and is the Coinbase transaction, all right? And is the payment that the miners pay themselves if they are able to find and mine the block and extend the block of chain. And they are going to get that reward. And here what Satoshi is saying is that the creator of the block, the miners, are going to get the coins that are in this transaction. Okay? This adds an incentive for nodes to support the network and provides a way to initially distribute coins into circulation, since there is no central authority to issue them. We know that in Bitcoin there are no third parties, okay? It's a decentralized system, so whenever people ask you where do new Bitcoin come from, here we have already said it before, but I'm going to say it again. So in that Coinbase transaction, we have all the fees of all the transactions that are in the block and the block reward. The block reward is currently 6.25 Bitcoin that are created every time a new block is mined. Okay, so whenever a miner mines the new block, he is creating new Bitcoin, which are 6.25 Bitcoin every time. All right. We know that Bitcoin has a limited supply. We will have almost 21 Bitcoin in circulation. Okay. And this is something that also Satoshi is saying here. Okay. The steady addition of a constant amount of new coins is analogous to gold miners expending resources to add gold to circulation. Here is making a comparison with gold. In our case, it is CPU time and electricity that is expended. Okay? Very well. Also Satoshi describes the fees of the transactions. Look, the incentive can also be founded with transactions fees. Not only do we have the block reward, but also the fees of each one of the transactions that are in the block. Okay? If the output value of a transaction is less than its input value, the difference of each transaction is a transaction fee. Whenever we discussed transactions, I told you that the difference between the inputs and the outputs is the fee of a transaction, and it is calculated by the wallet. The last thing that I want to say about incentives is that Satoshi was a genius. He also is mentioning about the limited supply of Bitcoin, which is one of the most important features of Bitcoin. Because we know that in fiat money, in paper money, it can be issued or printed out of nothing. Here we know that we are going to have almost 21 million Bitcoin in circulation, and that's it. So here Satoshi is saying once a predetermined number of coins have entered circulation, the incentive can transition entirely to transaction fees. Okay? So whenever almost the 21 million Bitcoin are in circulation, the miners are going to have just the fee of the transaction. And one of the things that is not mentioned here, but we can mention is, I'm sure if you have been in the crypto space this year, you have heard about the halving. The halving is something that happens in Bitcoin every 4 years, that is implemented in the protocol of Bitcoin. And every 4 years, the amount of Bitcoin that are created every time we mine a block are half they are cut it by half, okay? So before May this year, every time we used to mine a block, we had a double of what we have right now, okay? And now we have 6.25 Bitcoin every time we mine the next block. That is something that you need to take into consideration, and it is calculated or said that we're going to continue mining until the year 2140, okay? After that, we need to see how Bitcoin has been evolved as the technology. Remember that Bitcoin is technology that is constantly evolving as the internet. One of the quotes that I really like the most of this environment, space, or market is that not studying Bitcoin right now is like not studying the internet in the 90s. All right? And one of the things that I want you to understand is that it is technology that is constantly evolving, and many things that we thought that could not be made on Bitcoin, and that's the reason why altcoins have been created. Now that narrative has been changed and is changing. So many more things and many more capabilities are being discovered or implemented on top of Bitcoin right now, with some topics that I highlight that you study, what are called side chains. Okay, super important for you to write down the word side chain to keep on studying by your own. Point number 7 of the Satoshi white paper: reclaiming disk space. This is important, and this is another concept that I want you to understand, and this has to do with understanding the immutability of the system, and why whenever we say that whenever we have a transaction in a block that has been mined and that information cannot be modified or changed, it's a real thing. And now I'm going to explain to you more concepts that will help you understand this a little bit more. So once the latest transaction in a coin is buried under enough blocks, the spent transaction before it can be discarded to save this space. To facilitate this without breaking the block's hash, transactions are hashed in a Merkle tree. Okay, so Merkle tree is the concept that I want you to understand. And a Merkle tree is a structure that we use for efficiency and for security. So we know what a hash is, right? We explained that before. And we said that a hash is a fingerprint, is a summary of digital information, and a hash is unique for each thing that we're hashing. And in Bitcoin, we hash many different things. We hash a transaction, and we also said that we hash a block. We said that the process of mining requires making a double hash of the header of the block, which includes the hash of the previous block. Okay? So each one of the transactions in Bitcoin has a hash. All right? Has like a summary of that information in order to also for security reasons, immutability reasons, and for also to save disk space. So in a block is structured in the following way. This is like a macro perspective of how a block can be structured, but I want you to understand that a block has a block header and then the rest of the block, okay? In the block header, we have many different things. We have the nonce, the previous hash of the block of the previous block, and we also have the Merkle root. The Merkle root is a summary, a hash of all the transactions that are in this block, okay? And the Merkle root is what I said before, is a summary of all the transactions that are in a block. And when we talk about a Merkle tree, is something that you can visualize as follows. okay? Is a structure that we use for efficiency and for immutability, because here you can see transaction 0, transaction 1, 2, and 3. So what this structure does is basically the following. He's going to take this transaction 0 and is going to hash transaction 0. Transaction 1 is going to hash transaction 1. And then all the way up, he is hashing these two together so that we go all the way up with the hash of all the transactions that are included in this node. And this information, the Merkle root, is included in the header of the block so that we save information as well. The size of the header of the block is 80 bytes, okay? The block header is 80 bytes long, and this is something that I also wanted you to know. So basically here, what Satoshi is saying is this and this Merkle tree, Merkle root are two concepts that I need you to understand immutability, because whenever we said before that hash cannot be modified, if someone wants to do something malicious in the system and want to modify the transaction that has been already saved in a block, if you and I, we try to go and change a transaction or the numbers in the transactions or any type of information in the transaction, that action is going to be reflected in the hash because it's not going to be the same hash anymore, okay? And that malicious activity is going to be reflected in the hash of this hash and all the way up until the Merkle root, and that also is going to be highlighted in the block as well. So it's going to make the whole block as invalid. Now you can understand why the hashing process is important, and the Merkle tree is important for the following reason, as we have just described. This is part of us understanding why the system is immutable and secure. Okay, so for point number 8 and 9, I'm going to just give to you the macro conclusion of these 2 points because it's too much information and not as relevant as the information we reviewed before. So simplified payment verification, Satoshi is saying here that it is possible to verify payments without running a full node in the system. We know that the system is based on different nodes, and the different nodes have different responsibilities and activities that they are allowed to do in the system. A full node is the most complete node, so to speak, and he's allowed to do many different activities, okay? So in order to verify payments, you don't need to run a full node. You can use this simplified payment verification that Satoshi is describing. And he also says a user only needs to keep a copy of the block header of the longest proof of work chain, which he can get by querying network nodes until he's convinced that he has the longest chain, and obtain the Merkle branch linking the transactions to the block each time in. Basically, you can have what you need is the header, the block header of all the blockchain. That's the only information you need in order to verify payments. Okay, so this simplified payment verification is a type of system or strategy that some nodes use in order to do certain activities in the Bitcoin network. That's it, okay? So the conclusion is that you don't need to run a full node to do certain activities in the network, okay? Also, something that we mentioned before, Satoshi is explaining here, combining and splitting value. Here, Satoshi is talking about transactions, and the transactions have inputs and outputs. You can read it yourself, but it's basically what we learned before as well. And privacy, lastly, privacy is a topic in Bitcoin that is very interesting, and I suggest that you continue studying because We know that Bitcoin gives us more privacy if we compare with our credit cards or the information that we're required to provide on the internet in order to do something, a payment or a certain activity on the internet. The monopolies, the companies that are highly centralized, they want us to give a lot of information in exchange of us being allowed to do a certain thing. Okay, in Bitcoin, privacy is not 100% achieved, because in the moment that we tell someone that our public key is ours, that it belongs to me, we said before that is a open source system and we can verify absolutely everything. So if I give to you my public key right now, you can go to the blockchain and see all the activities that have been done with that public key. And you can also track the following activities that I'm going to do. Okay, so privacy is a topic that is very interesting. It's not 100% private, the Bitcoin system, but of course it gives us a way higher level of privacy if we compare it to the traditional centralized financial system or internet that we have in society right now. Actually, privacy is something that will continue to evolve in Bitcoin on a technical level, okay? And it is something that I'm going to talk on my channel. Actually, tomorrow I am recording an interview with a wallet, a type of wallet that is focusing on increasing privacy in Bitcoin, which is mind-blowing, okay? That's pretty much it. There are some type of calculations that Satoshi did on the Bitcoin white paper. We're not going to analyze that right now. So that was it. I hope you enjoy it. I hope it provides you a lot of value. I am sure you have many different questions, and that is normal. What I want you to understand is that this is an emerging technology, an emerging market with so much potential, not only from a job opportunities point of view, but also from a human impact point of view, from a wealth creation point of view, from an entrepreneurial point of view. So if you want to continue learning, you can contact me on Twitter, LinkedIn, on my YouTube channel in English, which is Tech with Carolina, or en español, Tech con Catalina. So I hope you enjoy it. As I said before, thank you for having me here, and I really look forward to meet you all in the future. Thank you. Bye-bye.